Okay, folks. Well, thank you very much, Nick, for that introduction. I'm hoping you can all see a large picture in front of you saying conserving butterflies in Cumbria. Can I have a thumbs up or a confirmation
Yes,
from?
definitely
Yep,
we
that's
can.
great. Thank you. That's good.
Yep.
And just a little reminder, I do love questions. And so if you have any questions, please do use the chat box and hopefully somebody will keep an eye on that. And perhaps at the end we'll have time for some questions because I do like that. I certainly can't necessarily provide all the answers, but it's fun to have a bit of a question and answer session. I was interested that Nick said that conservation is number one in Upper Thames branch. I think that's very true in Cumbria too. In fact, I think both branches have a lot in common. We're both big, although you're three counties and we're one. Cumbria is the fourth biggest county in the UK. And we both have some brilliant landscapes and some fantastic butterflies and some great members. There are some differences, of course, apart from being 250 miles further north and much more mountainous. We are a small branch in terms of membership. So there are only 500 members, but then Cumbria has a very small population. But we have some very active members and some very enthusiastic and supportive members. So we're very grateful for all they do. I think what helps is that because we have many national rarities in Cumbria, we do get more than our share of funding outside branch funds. We always spend what little money we receive each year, and we're always broke. Our balance just about breaks even. But certainly funding from in the past, we've had the landfill tax funding that's been very good in South Cumbria. More recently, various heritage lottery fund projects have helped. So certainly that's made a difference. Anyway, moving on, folks, I hope to spend most of the time looking at South Cumbria, but if we have time, I'll also look at the Marsh Fertility Project in North Cumbria and West Cumbria, and possibly even the Small Blue. Let's move on. So, as you know, in the UK, we perhaps have 59 breeding species of butterfly. Remarkably, Cumbria has 41 of those, which I think is remarkable for being so far north. In fact, there is evidence of 42. I'm a little coy about the 42nd because we haven't actually seen it on the wing, but we think we've seen some eggs. So ask me later on in the year if we have a 42nd. And certainly 37 can be seen quite easily without too much difficulty. So if we look at the hotspot map, yes, fantastic numbers of species down in the south, as you would expect. And yes, it does get less as you move north, but there's that little Morecambe Bay hotspot, which really is a treasure trove for habitats and butterflies. So some of the ones, let's look at the weather report. You'll see we have a lot more rain. Most of the Upper Thames branch is relatively dry. I know it doesn't always seem that way when you've been perhaps putting up with a number of days of heavy rain, but I can assure you when I moved here 11 years ago from Buckinghamshire, I was struck by the amount of rain that we really have up here, quite remarkable. But global warming is certainly changing things, and here's proof. You might have seen Dave Wainwright's slide before. And I should acknowledge my slides have been cribbed from all sorts of people. So thank you, David Wainwright, but also Martin Wayne, Tom Dunbar actually as well. Thank you very much for some of your slides. Also Sam Ellis, a number of students at Lancaster University, and Steve Doyle, my colleague here in Cumbria. But the effects of climate change have meant that more butterflies have moved north. So you'll see that actually the comma was very rare in Northern England until relatively recently. More recently, it's motored right through much of Scotland, so that slide is already out of date. And you'll see that the orange tip was quite rare in most of Scotland, and indeed it's now spreading further. So we welcome our new arrivals. Ringlets have spread rapidly, gatekeepers have spread. Small skippers. Somebody contacted the county recorder in the year 2000 in Cumbria and said, I've just seen a small skipper. And the county recorder understandably said, I'm sorry, madam, but I think you're mistaken. We don't actually have any small skipper. It must have been a large skipper. She'd actually spotted the first small skipper. So they only arrived in the year 2000, and now we have hundreds of colonies all over the county. So we welcome these species. They're mainly grass-feeding species, and certainly grass seems to grow throughout the year, even in Cumbria now with our mild winters. But of course, you know what I'm going to say next. Mild winters also can be a problem. And some of our rarer species actually do like a hard winter. And that's one reason why they're here, up in Morecambe Bay and up in other parts of Cumbria. So cold winters, I hope they're not a thing of the past. We do have a lot of different habitats, and we are fortunate to have species that have these different habitats. You might have spotted we don't have marbled white. That's the one butterfly on the screen I would love to see here, but we don't have. They've moved up the east coast, right up into County Durham, remarkably, but not the west coast. But we have damp grassland species too. We have limestone species, which I'll be concentrating on mainly in my talk. Upland, heathland species. Even peat bog species like the large heath. And in fact, we have two variants of the large heath, Davus and Polydama. And then brownfield sites. And the west coast of Cumbria certainly has plenty of brownfield sites, especially if we're looking at areas around Workington, Whitehaven, Maryport, and so on. So with all these different, Cumbria, especially South Cumbria, is the second most wooded area of the UK outside Sussex. So we do have a lot of woodland. Sadly, a lot of it isn't managed or even inappropriately managed. So there are some issues with unmanaged woods, but we have unmanaged woodland species such as these. And we have managed woodland species. Certainly, I'd like to see more of these, and I'd like to see more woods managed. And sometimes we can help with volunteers and contractors. At other times, we have to sadly walk away and say, well, we haven't the resources to do all that we'd like to do. But we're going to focus mainly on some of our rarer species. So lots of pretty pictures of some nice rarer species that some you have in Upper Thames and some you don't have. I put a little red asterisk against the species that we have. So there are 41 marked there with a little red asterisk. I say there's a mystery 42nd that I haven't. It is a habitat specialist, and I just want to make sure it's really there before I say. But it's quite an array of species, both habitat specialists and, of course, the wider countryside species. Some of the habitat specialists really are of national importance here in South Cumbria. And you might have seen this slide before. It won't come as a surprise to know that wider countryside species numbers oscillate. They have good years, they have less good years, but the overall trend, sadly, is down. Habitat specialists more so. So they certainly are feeling the pressure. And again, 2/3 of butterfly species are in decline. Most of the ones at this end are the rarer ones, like the high brown and the pearl-bordered fritillary, and they are facing the greatest declines. Whereas at the other end, I mean, the good news, let's be fair, there is some good news. The grass feeders, like the ringlets and the small skippers and meadow browns and so on, are tending to do quite well. And again, 2/3 of moths in decline too, which is often underreported. So we're going to look more at the habitat specialists because that's, I guess, what we're best known for. And that's what we spend most of our time and our resources working on. And of course, they have very highly specific requirements. So we really need to find out just what their requirements are before we can help them in the best way. And habitats can often be scattered. These butterflies are often very, very colonial. Males might wander a mile or two. Females are often reluctant to wander more than maybe 100 meters, in some cases less. Fragmentation is a problem. Butterflies are less likely then to move from one colony to another. And of course, it's a bit of a vicious circle, because then smaller colonies die out, and that then means that fragmentation is even greater, and there's less travel between sites, which cannot help the genetic strength of the population. Anyway, there's a nice a nice pearl-bordered fritillary. You can see the lovely central pearl in the middle of its hind wing. The question is, well, why bother? Aren't they doing okay? And the answer is, well, not really. Some are doing reasonably, but some are really struggling and need our help. And we're certainly trying to do what we can. But habitats have been damaged. Some are undermanaged or overmanaged or inappropriately managed. Some have been built over. Some have been intensively farmed and cultivated, hedgerows grubbed up, and so on. There are various reasons for the pressures that are on these butterflies. I said it's heavily wooded, but of course, woodland management, certainly coppicing, largely ceased in the 70s, possibly early 80s in some cases. And that clearly didn't help. Woodlands have become overgrown. There's more carbon in the atmosphere. There's more nitrogen in the atmosphere. Climate change might favor grass feeders, but it certainly doesn't favor some of our habitat specialists. So broadly speaking, the problems are to do with the environment and atmospheric pollution. Climate change obviously is a big issue, and growing intensification of land use and changes of land use can be a big problem. One of the problems we have here is I think there are just too many sheep. I think sheep grazing has its place. The Lake District is famous for its sheep and sheep grazing. It even got international heritage status on the back of being a sheep grazed landscape, would you believe? Seems remarkable to me. But up until the 60s, we had 1 million sheep, and now we have 2.5 million. Hopefully things will change with the new Environment Bill and some of the other things that are coming forward. Then hopefully I'd like to see more marginal land being less sheep grazed and returned to nature. Certainly there are many rewilding programs happening up in Cumbria, which is quite exciting. The Ennerdale rewilding scheme is particularly exciting, but there are many others, and pretty much every month I hear about new schemes. Some are quite small scale, others are larger. So we have a number of beaver reintroduction projects happening up here and so on. So these are the usual problems that we've all been faced with. Some are not brought on by us. You know, we've always had predation and parasitism and disease. However, I would say that a lot of the things on the screen right now have been made worse by human activity. Right, focusing on the Morecambe Bay Limestones Woodland Project first, we're fortunate in having one of these large landscapes that Nick was mentioning earlier. You'll see the whole of Cumbria is shaded green, and South Cumbria a dark green as a high priority landscape. And we certainly have some high priority butterflies. In particular, I guess the two best known national rarities that we have here are the high-brand fritillary and the pearl-bordered fritillary. Interesting that the pearl-bordered is doing slightly better in parts of the southeast now. And it's the small pearl that's struggling a little bit in some areas of the southeast. Up here, it tends to be the other way around. I think a lot of that is due to climate and climate change. The southeast is becoming drier and sunnier in the summer, and that actually suits the small pearl, which suits the pearl rather. Whereas the small pearl is actually quite happy to have a little bit of excess rain at times and a slightly longer grass sward and slightly more upland conditions. So the small pearl is doing pretty well here, and it's the pearl that we are a little bit more worried about. So Certainly from the 1980s onwards, things definitely went downhill in terms of woodland management and the woodland butterflies. And most of these rare fritillary butterflies in this part of the world tend to be woodland butterflies, although we do see some in more open areas as well. So something had to be done, and because we are a national stronghold for these butterflies, I think we felt a great responsibility. And certainly as branch chair, I feel a great sort of weighty burden in terms of keeping these rare butterflies in a reasonably healthy state as much as we can. What we're trying to do is to use our student researchers. I'll mention them again, from Lancaster University, from Cumbria University. We work very closely with universities and with research students to help us with our diagnosis of what's going wrong, testing solutions, and looking at ways in which we can recover and introduce management or recover the situation to a sustainable level. That certainly helped with the marsh fritillary, which I'll hope to come on to if we have time. And I think it's beginning to show some benefit to the pearl and the other rare butterflies that we have, like the Duke of Burgundy as well. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel. There's some excellent literature out there, some of it produced, of course, by Butterfly Conservation, looking at woodland management for butterflies, and in particular for fritillaries. So we know that it does make a difference. We know that woodlands that are managed in the right way can help with populations. You'll see that there is evidence here that high brown fritillaries do benefit from woodland management intervention. Certainly we were getting too many woods looking like this. Your screen hasn't gone wrong. It really is a very gloomy, dark shaded wood. If you saw a speckled wood there, you'd be lucky. We want to open them up, let more light in, and if we can open them a little bit more and let even more light in, then we're looking for rides that look much more like this. But of course, it takes time and resource, be it manpower, and indeed, if we are paying for contractors, then we need financial resources to back this up. Some of the work's done by volunteers. We have a number of chainsaw trained and brush cutter trained volunteers. So some of our budget gets gobbled up by refresher courses, training and refresher courses. And we have work parties, again, common with Upper Thames. Like you, we have we put a lot of emphasis on work parties. I know you do. Some brash is burnt, some bits stacked in habitat log piles, some brash is put under trees, especially we have quite a few yew trees and not much grows under a yew tree, so we tend to stash material under there. We have teams of people with loppers and bow saws and goggles and helmets and brush cutters and chainsaws as well. So here's a work party out opening up habitat. This is probably opening it up for fritillaries. Quite often they fly together, so good sites might have 2, 3, 4, or even 5 different fritillaries flying on those sites. This looks much more like contractor work. I think I know where it is. Up on Whitbarrow, an absolute jewel in the crown. To me, Whitbarrow is one of the top 2 or 3 butterfly locations in the UK. And I am thinking, yes, of Porton Down. I am thinking of Martin Down. I would have to say Whitbarrow is actually up there with the very, very best sites that we have in the UK. So we put some of our financial resource into getting contractors to do something that we thought would make a difference. Dead hedging is one of the things that we use, again, to dispose of excess brash and so on. And indeed, it creates useful habitats for mini beasts and so on. So focusing on the 5 key fritillaries that we have in Morecambe Bay, and I hope to mention and say the marsh fritillary a bit later. And I'm going to count the Duke of Burgundy as an honorary fritillary for the purpose of this talk. But the flight periods are slightly different. Pearl Borders, I'm always amazed how early they come out at Warton Crag, which is in Lancashire, just south of Kendal, about 10 miles south of Kendal, where I live. So Pearl Borders there are coming out in the middle of April, which I'm always amazed. Even this year, when we had such a cold April with heavy frost, I was astonished that they were out on the 16th of April. Small pearls are usually quite a bit later, but there's often an overlap. The last 2 or 3 years has been virtually no overlap in flight period because the pearls have been out so early, which I say I don't really fully understand. High brown and dark green usually come out at around about the same time, usually the 3rd week of June. When we have really, really early summers, it can be the 2nd week of June. More likely it's the 3rd week, sometimes even the 4th week if it's a late summer. High brown have a longer tail. That graph isn't totally right in my book, in that high brown can be seen right through August. We've even had, I think it was Tom Dunbar, when he spent a lot of time up here, found a high brown on the 1st of September in Holmestinted Pastures, one of our key sites for high brown. Dark green, on the other hand, peak much earlier and then have a much shorter tail to their flight season and tail away quite rapidly in August. Silver washed, I would suggest, as Nick mentioned earlier, have a much longer flight season and certainly can fly right through August. If August is a good year, and up here, summers really are shorter. You know, when I moved from Buckinghamshire, apart from the rain, you really do have a shorter summer. And August can almost be the beginning of autumn up here. So this year we had a good August. Not always the case. Anyway, we're going to be looking at this model again that I mentioned earlier. So that's just to refresh your memory. The pearl bordered, some of these slides are from wonderful students from Lancaster University in particular, who've been doing some fantastic research, mainly on Warton Crag and on Whitbarrow, these 2 great slabs of Carboniferous limestone that are just so superb for fritillary butterflies. And this young lady looked at the pearl bordered fritillary, mainly on Warton Crag. Yes, it needs violet. All these fritillaries that we're looking at the moment rely on dog violet. Small pearls are very happy to take marsh violet, and we have some sites where it's almost all marsh violet. And there's a lot of violet about, except research has shown that one of the key problems I would suggest, is that violet cover is well down. And that's largely because grass cover is up. And with these long, wet, mild winters that I mentioned earlier, where grass grows almost continuously, violets are being squeezed. And that's one of the biggest problems that we're facing, because it's a tricky one. You know, how on earth do you go about reversing that process? Well, the answer is very difficult, if not impossible. But you can see from the distribution map that pearls are up in South Cumbria. Small pearls are found on hundreds of sites, and I literally mean hundreds of sites right across Cumbria, whereas pearls you could count certainly on your fingers and toes in terms of sites. I would say less than 20 sites, and probably only 10 significant sites down in South Cumbria. Obviously, they are present in just across the border in Dumfries and Galloway, especially around the Maybe Forest, and then further north in North Scotland. There are a lot of good sites down there. Or perhaps I should say up there, really. Right, the graph is not good reading. You'll see that, yes, there have been some good years, but overall, the trend is quite drastically down. And this particular site, top right, is a slope on Warton Crag. Just for those that don't know it, it's very near Carnforth. If you like, it's halfway between Lancaster and Kendal. And it's a limestone site managed specifically for high brown and pearl. The high brown have probably gone, which is horrendous, because only 15 years ago, you could see literally hundreds of high brown flying around Warton Crag. If you saw one, you'd be doing well. Pearls have gone right down in number, and this slope is probably now the only location on Warton Crag where pearls are still found. So here's the pearl with that lovely central pearl that's so diagnostic in the center of the hind wing. There it is on bugle. Bugle's a great nectar source at this time of year for small pearl. They'll take whatever nectar they can. You can see it's May time on bluebell. And the pearl, the blue line, you'll see has done worse than the small pearl. So small pearls are doing reasonably okay and are on quite a lot of sites throughout Cumbria. It is the pearl that's very localized and much the rarer of the two in this part of the world. So there are problems. Some are climatic, microclimate's key, of course. Abundance of violet, we're losing violet, the quality of the violet as well, and the overwintering conditions for the other stages. We're looking for violets like this, lots and lots of violet, bits of moss and bracken and dead litter, leaf litter, bits of twig and so on. Pearls will lay their eggs on violet or close to violet. Small pearls are less fussy and will often lay their eggs on grass. As long as it's near to violet, they don't seem to care too much. But this sort of habitat's good for pearls. There's quite a bit of bracken, there's some open ground. The sun can get through, it can warm up quite rapidly. There's no thick sward, there's no damp, heavy turf. So that's good pearl laying habitat. Some of the students have been doing capture, mark and release projects. So this pearl is just being marked up, given a coding so that we know exactly which one when it's recaptured, and we can look at how far it's moved, where it's moved, how often it's moved, and so on. In fact, you can learn an awful lot from these sorts of studies. And you'll see that not that long ago, there were 5 distinct sites of pearl on Wharton Crag. There's the village of Wharton. Just off the screen to the left is the sea, Morecambe Bay. So it has very mild air coming in over the Atlantic Ocean, over the Gulf Stream, and a southwesterly prevailing wind, giving you very mild conditions. And the slopes that face southwest really do warm up. They have short turf and can become very warm. The microclimate's very favorable for pearl and small pearl. It's the pearl that need a very warm microclimate. Again, the small pearl aren't quite so fussy about that. Here's a slightly more sophisticated marking scheme that was used a little bit later by another student. So you just mark the appropriate pearl and it's on a coded system so you can tell immediately which number that is. So the bottom one has a 1 and a 7, so that's number 8. And obviously, if you recapture it, you can work out exactly what it's been up to since it was last seen. Sadly, by 2016, only 3 sites remained. And the one at the top of the picture has gone. That went first, and then the smaller blob next. And then we've just got this reasonably large colony left now at the bottom. So that's the only one left nearest to the big quarry to the left. You can see there's a quarry there. It's an old limestone quarry, and nearer to the village of Wharton and to the road. And that's the slope there. And that's being managed. They manage it on a rotation, unlike doing a hazel coppice rotation, which is usually every sort of 10, 12 years, like you would expect a coppicer to do. That they're managing scrub invasion on a sort of a 4 or 5 year rotation. So there are always some patches of very open ground where it can warm up quite rapidly. And there's a mosaic of these patches on that slope. Yellantall allotment used to be a good site just a few miles to the north of Wharton Crag, but you'll see that the hard winters, actually the hard winter of 2010, I'm sure was partly the reason why we had such a good 2011. As you'll see on the graph, numbers shot up. But then sadly, the mild winters since, I'm sure are partly why it's gone down. I mean, it's not the only reason. But sadly, Yellantall allotment that was so good for pearl border doesn't actually have any at the moment. We haven't given up hope they might come back. They are still not too far away. And I do know of some sites that have been recolonized by pearls. So we must never give up on these guys. keep working away, keep trying to get the habitat right, and I hope that they do return. So in summary, site connectivity is important, and sadly on Warton Crag, there's just the one site left. Microclimate's very important in terms of managing it in the way I mentioned. Interestingly, Nick mentioned wing morphology, and one of the students did some very interesting research showing that the wings, the forewings in particular, of pearls have changed. If you look at museum specimens from, say, 50, 100 years ago and compare them to today, the actual shape of the wings has slightly changed. And we think that also is impacting on their ability to fly distances and to link up with neighboring colonies. So that's something that perhaps we don't always think about, but looks like the research shows there is definitely something going on there. Looking at the high brown, again, the graph is even more alarming. In fact, when I look at that, it is quite depressing, isn't it? But I'm going to argue that it's not quite as bad as it looks. You'll see the diagnostic rusty rings on this stunning butterfly. We have a lot of dark green up here, and they often fly together, and it's very easy to mix the two up. But the rusty rings really, if the butterfly is kind enough to shut its wings, is a great indicator. If it doesn't, well, you can look for that slightly concave profile to the forewing, whereas the dark green certainly has a slightly convex profile. So they're two indicators to help separate the two out. When you get your eye in, as it were, they do fly slightly differently. The high brown looks like it's on a bit of a mission and sort of tends to put its head down and go straight for where it wants to go. The dark green can't quite make up its mind and sort of flutters a little bit more. So there are slight differences. Also, later in the season, the dark green loses a lot of its coloring and becomes quite pale compared with the high brown that seems to retain a real ginger color. And so the gingeriness becomes more and more significant as the season goes on and really does show up quite prominently. But what a beautiful butterfly, an absolute cracker. But the distribution you see is again very depressing. You know that the Malvern Hills has lost its population, so it's only found now in Lakeland, South Lakeland, and South Wales, and then around the edge of Dartmoor and along the one or two sites along the coast of Devon and Cornwall. But apart from that, that is it. Probably our rarest butterfly, and certainly one that's declined rapidly, as you'll see from the figures. Both the distribution and the population have suffered some serious declines over the years. There's just a lovely mating pair of high brown. And again, you see the colouring does vary from one to another. Some of them have a little bit more of a green flush. And I've heard people say, oh, no, it's a dark green because I can see the green flush on the hind wing. And certainly they can look quite similar to dark green. But the rusty ring is the giveaway. And they like this sort of habitat. They like violet growing through bracken litter. And they like lots of bracken. Bracken's key, it's really important. Some sites were inappropriately managed. We came across people where they were cutting bracken and removing it, and raking it off the site. But actually violets flourish under bracken, and that's probably more important now than ever, because without the bracken suppressing grass, then the violets will disappear. And grass will take over. And high brown and pearl are the two fussiest of the fritillaries. They need a lot of violet. Small pearl and dark green will look at patches of violet and think, yeah, that's okay, that's fine. There's enough there, I'm happy. High brown and pearl will say, no, I want carpets of the stuff. I want lots of it. And I don't want all this grass that's getting in the way. And that really does make a huge difference. So also that has implications for the microclimate, because obviously bracken litter if you use one of these temperature guns, it's always worth taking one out into the field. You can buy these little temperature guns that you can get for only a few pounds, and you'll find that the air temperature at ground level is so different, and especially on something like bracken, which can really heat up. So the caterpillars can bask in the sun, they can digest their food much more rapidly, get through their life cycle. And this is why, of course, small bipearls do so well up in northwest Scotland. People often say to me, well, how can they survive? It's too cold. But if the microclimate's right, that makes all the difference. So these are most of our sites for high brown. And so they haven't all disappeared, thank goodness. The blue ones, you'll see, we can still find reasonable numbers on most of those sites. Yes, we have lost a few, but we've also gained a few. When I say gained, I suspect it's a bit like Nick was saying earlier. You know, if people go out and look for them in likely places, we're still actually finding new high brown sites. That seems remarkable, doesn't it? Our rarest butterfly. And yet last year we found a completely new site in the Rustland Valley, which we just didn't know about. So that's quite exciting to think that you know, there might still be some sites out there that we don't know. But recorders and people who like to check these things out. I mean, when Tom was spending more time up here, he was brilliant at going out looking at finding new sites, and he did for all sorts of species. So that's an important thing to do. So anyway, these are the sites, and you'll see that some of them are reasonably close, and the high brown's a big, powerful butterfly. So certainly in some locations, it can fly from one colony to another. And obviously that's a healthy sign in terms of connectivity. Is when they become more and more isolated and we start thinking that they can't do that, that we start to worry about losing some of these sites. So Dartmoor, yes, and Exmoor, we mentioned South Wales, Glamorgan, they have sites too, but you'll see that the Morecambe Bay limestone has 17 of the sites listed there. I would actually, it depends on what you call a colony. I would say we have more. Clearly some colonies close together, someone's going to say, well, it's all one colony, and others will say, no, that's actually 2 or 3. So that's semantic, really. I mean, it doesn't matter, but we've kept most of our sites. I don't think we've actually lost too many colonies. I think the worry for us with the high brown is that some of the larger and medium-sized sites have become sort of smaller, and that is a concern. But the last 2 or 3 years have been reasonably good. I mean, on Arnside Knot, for example, where they were disappearing fast, and I really thought they would have gone by now, this year they had a slight recovery. So there is hope, there is hope. One of the problems I mentioned is grass taking over from violet, and violet cover is certainly down. If vegetation height is higher, that's a problem. Too many bluebells is a problem, too much strawberry, too much wood sage, bramble growth. Bramble is growing far more here than it's ever done before. I'm sure it's partly through climate change, and it's partly through excess carbon and nitrogen in particular in the atmosphere that's causing bramble to grow like it's never done before, and that's an issue. Bracken we like, bracken's good, but bracken and violet is the perfect combination. And there are materials out there again, you know, although our students have been wonderful in finding out all sorts of things to help us with our management, obviously they are references like this guide to managing butterflies with bracken. Slightly more detail now on Wharton, on Whitbarrow. That's the big slab of limestone just north of the A590, for those that know, on the road from Kendal to Grange over Sands along the main south road that eventually goes on to Ulverston and Barrow. You pass this huge, great cliff-like feature that's just here, if the pointer is showing up, this great promontory of limestone, and then this great slab that's several miles from top to bottom. Absolutely stunning for all our fritillaries, apart from the marsh fritillary, but we've got Duke of Burgundy there as well, pearl and small pearl. There's silver wash fritillary, of course, and high brown and dark green. So again, coming back to our graph, we're testing out solutions, and some things we feel are on the way to recovery. Certainly, silver washed are recovering well. Small pearls and pearls seem to be stabilizing a little bit. Dukes are doing quite well. We're very, very pleased with our marsh fritillary program in the north of Cumbria. So we're getting there, we're working on it. And these landscape scale booklets have been written and produced by people like Dave Wainwright and others. Sam Ellis was very much involved, as you know, in helping us look at landscape scale conservation. So we've had the benefit of David Wainwright and Martin Wayne working with us to advise us on how best to look at them as landscapes. Looking at the small pearl, so this butterfly we feel is doing quite well. You see it has many, many more pearls. Yes, it's slightly smaller in size, but you can't really use that as a guide. The diagnostic features are the many, many more pearls that it has here. There are other differences. Along the edge of the butterfly, it's more like a lattice of chevrons, where you've got an inner and an outer chain of chevrons that are joined together to form like a figure of 8. So you get this sort of black lattice along the edge, whereas with the pearl, they're separate. They do fly together, and it can be confusing, but you'll see that the small pearl is much more widespread in southwest England, in many, many parts of Wales, throughout Cumbria. Yes, there's some sites in North Yorkshire as well, as they are indeed for the pearl and the Duke. And in Scotland, of course, a stronghold for the small pearl. So looking at the graph, you can see things are looking a little more positive here, doing pretty well. 1 or 2 bad years, but overall quite good. Another feature is this 730. I personally tend to look at the lattice around the edge more, but it's just what you get used to, and the number of pearls if it shuts its wings. But a beautiful butterfly. Sometimes people in Cumbria have taken small pearls for granted, because we do have many, many colonies, as I mentioned. Oh, it's only a small pearl. I've heard that say, and I think it's a stunning butterfly. And of course, nationally, it is still scarce and absent from most of the country. But there it is, a medium-sized butterfly, not much smaller than the pearl. I'd say I wouldn't rely on size. That's the female. You see the slightly heavier dark lattice around the edge and a slightly lighter, paler background. So you've got a bit more of a contrast between the light and the dark, whereas going back to the male, a little more orangey and not quite so heavily blackened around the edges. Back on Wharton Crag again, and another student doing another project. In fact, here she is, Liz. This is me, would you believe? Here's a group we took on a walk around the site, and we actually just bumped into Liz, which was brilliant. She was up there every day during the flight season, doing her capture, mark and release program. And they've come up, we've got undergrads, but we've got MSc students and PhD students doing research on some of these sites. And we try to help them. We can help them a little bit with background information and showing them the sites, taking them around. They soon end up learning far more than we do. So we can't help them perhaps later on. And we sometimes even help them a little bit with the finance, and like to support them with things like transport costs and so on, just to sort of sponsor them, to make them feel that they are part of what we're all trying to do. And then they usually share their research with us, which is wonderful. And better still, we've arranged joint symposiums at Lancaster University and at Edgehill University, where the students showcase their work. And Jim Asher came to one of our conferences just about 3 or 4 years ago before COVID, was one of our key speakers. And once COVID's out of the way, we hope to restart those conferences. The dark green fritillary, again, people often say, oh, it's only a dark green because they want to see a high brown. Well, I don't think we should ever say only a dark green. They're a stunning butterfly, an absolutely beautiful butterfly. A little bit up and down. I noticed Nick said you had a very poor year for dark green in the Upper Thames area. And we've had a few poor years after a run of good years. This year, again, probably a little bit down, but on the key sites, on the really good dark green sites, you could still see quite good numbers. I mean, if I was walking on Hutton Roof, which is another big limestone upland, just the other side of the M6 motorway, just before you get to Kendal, on a 2-hour walk at peak flight, I might see 150, maybe 200. So, that's perhaps when you start thinking, oh, it's only another dark green. But we mustn't take them for granted. That's when the danger sets in. But a beautiful butterfly. Big, powerful butterfly. And again, the female with, I think the female dark green is actually one of our most striking, handsome butterflies that we have in the UK. They really are stunning, and they do stand out. You can tell female dark greens from high brown quite easily because they are just so striking with a lighter brown background and this beautifully heavily marked blacker background. Now, if one or two of you are thinking, our female dark greens don't look quite as black as that, you're probably spot on because they tend to get darker and darker as you move north. And certainly in Scotland and in northern Scotland, they would be actually much blacker still. So that does seem to make a difference. And the silver washed is an interesting butterfly for us. A lot of people are surprised that we actually have it. It was here in this area, not far from Kendal, right up until the mid-70s, and then it seemed to vanish. It was in quite a few woodlands and quite well recorded. And then it reappeared in the 90s. Now, we don't know what happened. Did it shrink right back to just one or two isolated pockets and then expand its range again? Or did it die out altogether and was reintroduced? And we've no evidence to prove one or the other. I like to think it was always there, but these last few years, it hasn't expanded like it has in the southeast of England. The way it's motored right through East Anglia, it hasn't done that here. It's more or less maintained its presence in about 10 woodlands, maybe 15 woodlands in South Cumbria, and it hasn't spread out from that. But again, great to see. This year, I saw my largest ever silver wash fritillary. I was looking at them at a good site, and then one flew by that, it's a bit like fisherman's tails, isn't it? I could swear it was twice the size. I've never seen such a large silver wash fritillary. It was breathtaking, but a great butterfly. Oh, we're going this way. Duke of Burgundy is my honorary fritillary today because we do have some great sites for it up here. It has struggled a little bit on some sites, but there's evidence of a recovery. I know it's recovered very well in the south. Of course, the distribution of cowslip and primrose would suggest that Duke should be much more widespread across the UK, but of course it's very localized because it is a fussy butterfly, as you know. Again, they love bugle. What a great nectar source at that time of year. So there's the distribution.
Chris, sorry to interrupt. We're in danger of running out of time, I think. So
okay.
I hate to cut you off mid-flow, but are you able to? Yeah, thanks.
No, I'll wrap it up. So we've got Dukes in the south, obviously doing well, and in Morecambe Bay and in North Yorkshire. But nationally, I think they are doing a little better. So that's good news. So just moving on, these are former Duke sites. We did actually have about 60 Duke sites, would you believe, in Morecambe Bay. This is a picture of Morecambe Bay with all the red spots of Duke sites. Sadly, nearly all of those went in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s. So we're now concentrating in the areas that are marked red with the red lines around. There are two main Duke sites today. and then another one that's off the map that was more recently discovered. But things are looking up for the Duke, so that's good. Now, that would take us on to the small pearl, but that would be a small blue, but that would be the perfect spot to end, because that's perhaps another talk for another time. If we had more time, obviously we could look at the small blue, we could look at the marsh fritillary project and other projects that we have running. But I'm not too surprised, we've run out of time. So
yeah, there's a lot to say, isn't there? Yeah, amazing.
Anyway, folks, I hope you've enjoyed that, and I hope we have a few questions, even if we only have a minute for questions.
Yeah, Nick had a question. Do you want to?
Yeah, well, I've got two observations. Firstly, thank you very much, Chris. It was fascinating to hear that you've got those species and hanging on to them. I did put a question in about how do you get your volunteers, but I'd also be interested on your thoughts about a project I heard of yesterday where they've decided to plant upland bracken with trees because it's the best place to put trees because there's nothing living in the bracken. So two questions, if you like, but we would have to be very quick, please, with the answers.
Okay. Well, I was out at a work party on Wednesday, and our numbers swelled from 5 to 8 because we had a gentleman who was interested in bees, actually, and runs a bee sanctuary, a bee reserve, which I'd contacted because I was interested to visit his bee reserve, and he came out and joined us. And two others came from our Green Recovery Project, two young people. Martin Wayne is running this Heritage Lottery funded Green Recovery Project. A lot of it is done by social media, and they're getting their own team of volunteers. They're not necessarily BC members, but they're more into social media. And the social media side of it has drawn in some younger recruits, and then some of those came out to join us. And they were very good. We've also had some work parties staffed totally by students. We've also contacted some groups that have mental or physical disabilities. And they're often very keen to come out. I mean, obviously, you need supervision, you need a little bit of training, perhaps. But if you're not too ambitious, a lot of them can do some really good work, and they love it. And it's great for their mental well-being. And indeed for their physical health. So there are things like that that can draw in extra people. I think if you take a guided walk and you list down all the people that come on a walk, you can usually pick up, can't you, as you go around, which ones are quite keen. If you have their contact details, contact them direct. They might not be members. If people come on our walks that aren't members, we don't fuss, we don't say, well, you're not a member, you must join. We would like them to join. We always take half-price membership forms along with all our walks, and we give out them, whether they want one or not, to those that come. And we say, well, if you are a member already, give it to your neighbour. But using half-price membership forms, which are available, you can always order a stack load more from head office. At the moment, they've got some free membership offers. I prefer half-price membership, show some sort of level of commitment. Give them all out, get their names and addresses, contact them up later, and actually put them on the spot and say, can you come? Or can I add you to my list of people I can call on? And they might say, well, no, I can't come this time or next time. But if you circulate that list and make that list grow and send it out each time to the next, as a reminder to the next working party that you have, that you'd love to see them there, then you can attract a few extra. They're not going to come in droves, but you can certainly increase the numbers that turn up that way. Regarding bracken and trees, Nick, I mean, violets grow wonderfully well under bracken cover because it does suppress the grass so, and it acts, it's so warm, the microclimate can get so good for them. I've never heard of, I mean, the great thing about trees and coppicing, of course, is that the trees will crowd out the growth of bramble and other ground covering scrub that could be a nuisance. And the violet seed bank is there in the soil, and once you clear a plot, usually there's a fantastic flush of violet, and it's the first 2 or 3 years that are so good for the pearl and the high brown, but then you have to keep on clearing a new plot and a new plot all the time. It's like painting the Forth Bridge, but that's the best way to maintain those really fussy fritillaries.
I'm afraid, although we've got some questions popping up now, we're going to have to move on. I'm sorry about that, Chris. It might be, if we get you the questions sent to you, you could reply to these people outside the meeting.
Look, just a plea, please go on the Cumbria branch website, look at our sightings page, click on newsletters, and you can look at our last, I think, 15 newsletters are all up there, and see what people are seeing, where they're seeing them, what articles are being written about all these things that I've mentioned. We'd love you to do that. So hopefully that will help.
Thank you. Yep, thank you very much, Chris. But we must move on, I'm afraid. So we're running behind time slightly, but that's not such a bad thing, because it's far better to have something interesting take a bit longer than have something that's short and dull. So thanks very much again.
Pleasure.
I'm going to hand on to Pete now.